Welcome to another episode of Talking Shit. Shit, of course, is an acronym for Straight Health Insurance Talk. My name is Matt Allen, and with me today is my business partner, Aaron Miller.
How's it going, everybody?
Going fantastically over here, and today we are going to be covering pre-existing conditions. This is a term that's thrown around a lot in the health insurance space, and a lot of people have a lot of different definitions for it. And so there's just a lot of confusion, and hopefully on this episode, we can cut through some of that confusion for you.
Yeah, I mean, for those who are new to this, we run a health insurance brokerage, and we have an intake form. And that intake form asks, do you have any major pre-existing conditions or take any non-generic medications? And people just simply answer the question wrong all the time. I mean...
Okay. You say answer wrong, but I don't know if that's fully true. Do we actually ask major pre-existing conditions, or do we just say pre-existing conditions?
It's a good question. It might just say pre-existing conditions.
Okay. So for the layman, they may think anything's a pre-existing condition. And so by you saying they're answering it wrong, I think is a little disingenuous.
They're answering it the way they know how, based on what the question's asking, based on, I guess, what they think a pre-existing condition is.
Which is the perfect reason for us to have this conversation.
Yep.
Because we aren't asking it necessarily to know all about your business. We are trying to make sure that we are showing you the correct health insurance plan. And if you have a severe pre-existing condition or a non-generic medication, that is going to require a specific type of health insurance. That is the purpose of us asking that, because we want you to have coverage that works for you and actually covers the things that you need it to cover. So we're not trying to ask you, hey, do you have a pre-existing condition? Because we want you to say no, because then you'll have access to better plans or better rates or anything like that. We want the plan to make sense for you. So we need you to answer it accurately so we can get you the right plan.
Yeah. And I think that first part that you said, people answer no or they're afraid to disclose. I mean, it's all HIPAA compliant over here. We have to keep your information close to the chest underneath all the different layers of security. And it's funny, like you'll have a conversation, it'll be the second conversation, and people will relinquish information that will completely change what the recommendation is. Like people are afraid sometimes to talk about what's going on health-wise with their health insurance broker.
And that kind of makes sense. And I think it's partially that, but I genuinely do think that it's more so people thinking, if I tell them I got a pre-existing condition, they're only going to show me the bad plans. Or this is going to be more expensive if I tell them that I need my hip replaced. So I'll just say I won't, and then I'll get the good coverage, and then I'll be able to go get my hip replaced, when that's not how it works, and that's not what we're asking for. If you need your hip replaced, I'm going to have a totally different recommendation for you than if you tell me you're perfectly healthy and you don't need a hip replaced. I want the coverage to work for you. And so I think that's more so the angle a lot of people are taking on a questionnaire. Is they're like, no, I'm totally healthy. What are you talking about?
And everyone's definition of healthy?
Everybody thinks they're better looking than the average, they're smarter than the average, and they're healthier than the average.
Better driver, yeah.
I don't know about that one.
But yeah, I mean, everyone thinks that they are healthier than sometimes they actually are. And yeah, I think this kind of leads to the first question. What is a pre-existing condition? Because if I Google it and I click on the first link, it's going to tell me that, cancer and acne are both pre-existing conditions. And those are two very different situations that, frankly, couldn't be more different.
Right. But they are both pre-existing. And so what you really need to figure out, and you kind of got to get into the weeds a little bit if you have a plan that has anything to do with pre-existing conditions, is you've got to see how they define it specifically in the plan. So there will be a place where they are defining terms. There are some plans that say a pre-existing condition is something that you've been treated for, saw a doctor for, were advised for, or prescribed medication for in either the 12 months prior to the plan starting, 24 months prior to the plan starting. Some go back as much as 5 years before the plan started. And that is specifically important when the type of health insurance you're signing up for has a waiting period to cover pre-existing conditions. And as I'm sure so many people understand, there are plans out there that don't have any waiting period for pre-existing conditions. Mm-hmm. And that's why it's so important for us to know if you need something done right away or if you have something going on. We are not going to show you the plans that have a waiting period for pre-existing conditions. It's not a good fit for your situation. So we just simply need to know, do you have anything going on? If you do, well, we're going to get you a plan that doesn't have a waiting period to cover pre-existing conditions. It's that simple.
Yeah. And so, when people are thinking about themselves in terms of, do I have a pre-existing condition that would warrant me, answering a questionnaire saying, do you have a major pre-existing condition? What would, a common thing that people would say, yes, I have a major pre-existing condition that actually, isn't a big deal. I know big deal is subjective. We are talking about in terms of health insurance, but a lot of the plans that we look at, high cholesterol is not considered a major pre-existing condition. High blood pressure, same deal. So where does the line get drawn in your eyes if we do, change our form to say major pre-existing condition?
So it's simply about, are you going to need treatment for it within the next 12 months? And kind of how expensive is that treatment going to be? If you potentially need coverage for something like that, I'm never going to want to take a chance on putting you on a plan that has any sort of waiting period. So you mentioned high blood pressure. I don't know what the percentage of people in America who have high blood pressure. It's probably really high. And so that isn't necessarily going to be a pre-existing condition because you take a low dose like atorvastatin or something and then you got it in check. And then there's really no condition there. You're not going to need a $20,000 claim because you have high blood pressure. And so that's not really what we're concerned about. We're concerned, hey, I need my hip replaced. Hey, I'm 6 months pregnant. Hey, I have uncontrolled type 2 diabetes. My A1C level is always out of whack. Hey, I've got multiple sclerosis. Hey, I've got Crohn's disease. These are the types of things that are going to need regular treatment, potentially expensive medications, potentially procedures, and there's no reason for us to ever even entertain a plan that has a pre-existing condition waiting period. So those are the things we're worried about. To certain people, when they think pre-existing conditions, like, well, I have asthma. It's like, okay, so you take an inhaler, but that's not going to cause you to have a $40,000 surgery because you have asthma. Same thing with allergies or anxiety or depression. These are serious conditions. We are not trying to belittle anything by that. But if there's a 12-month waiting period on your major medical health insurance for your anxiety, that's not going to stop you from going and seeking the same care that you've been seeking for the anxiety. Like, you're not going to have a $20,000 anxiety claim. So that's what we're really trying to look out for, is if you have a pre-existing condition that's going to result in a large claim, potentially, or for sure, we need to know about that. All health insurance agents, they need to know about that right away. If you just have minor things that you're taking a maintenance medication for and it's just not really that big of a deal and you don't see anything on the horizon, well, having a 12-month waiting period on that, it's just not that big of a deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the big questions people have when we talk about plans that do have a waiting period is, okay, well, how are they checking? What does the underwriting look like? And, what are they doing to verify that?
That's a great question. So most applications will have these things called knockout questions when you go through it. So if you're entertaining a plan that potentially has a pre-existing condition waiting period, they're going to ask you a bunch of yes/no questions. And if you answer yes to any of them, like, hey, I have Parkinson's, they're going to say, well, we're not giving you the plan. Hey, I have uncontrolled type 2 diabetes. Okay, we're not going to give you the plan. But if you can say no to all of those, then some of the plans, they'll just issue you the plan. And then in the first 12 months, if you do make a large claim, that's when they'll pull medical records and they'll sort of do retroactive underwriting, and they'll go back and see, hey, according to the terms in this policy, did you have a pre-existing condition that resulted in this $5,000 claim? And if after their pre-existing condition investigation, they determine no, then they're going to pay the claim. No big deal. Other health insurance companies that do have these pre-existing condition endorsements, they'll do their underwriting on the front end, and this can often be a lengthy process. You might have to do a phone interview. They might pull medical records, prescription history, and then they'll want explanations for, well, we saw that you were prescribed this 2 years ago. What was that for? Why did you stop taking it? What was the diagnosis? And it can kind of be this long, drawn-out thing, but once you have that coverage, once you go through that work on the front end, then they typically don't scrutinize much in the first year because they know what's pre-existing and they know what's not. So both ways are viable. You're going to get your policy quicker on the first way, where they don't do the medical underwriting up front. And honestly, I think that's more of a streamlined approach. But some people prefer the underwriting up front, just get that kicked out of the way.
I like it. And you talked a little bit about look back periods. Like, hey, if you do make a large claim in the first 12 months, they can go back and look at your medical records. So what does that actually mean to people? It's like, do I need to be worried? Should I, just really not have a big claim in the first 12 months and wait? Like, is it a big deal to have a look back?
I think it protects the health insurance company. Look, we're seeing these catastrophic, astronomical rises in health insurance premiums year over year over year. And one of the main culprits and reasons for that is because these health insurance companies, I'm primarily talking about those on the Affordable Care Act, healthcare.gov, those are the ones that cover pre-existing right away. Those are the ones getting the largest rate increases. These plans cannot assess the risk to insure the people who are joining them. They can't look at your health. And so they have to artificially inflate premiums for everyone, artificially inflate deductibles for everyone, and limit your provider choice because they have to control their costs somehow. Like it or not, the health insurance companies on the ACA Marketplace are in it to make a living. And I'm going to get to your point here really soon. So when we talk about potential health insurance companies offering ACA alternatives that do have a waiting period on pre-existing conditions and do potentially have this look back, if you want to be concerned about it and you want to be worried about it, I recommend you just don't have one of those plans. If you ever have a question in your mind of, hey, what does the waiting period look like? Do you think this would be covered? If you have any questions about wanting medical care in the first 12 months and you're worried about a pre-existing, just go on the ACA. It'll be covered for sure. But if you're healthy and nothing's going on and something new happens when you're on one of these plans with a waiting period, it's going to be covered. They just have to make sure you aren't exploiting the system by having a pre-existing, taking out this plan, filing a claim in the first 12 months for something you already knew you needed done. That's the whole point. I think the look-back period makes a ton of sense. I think it's great because these ACA alternatives are usually way cheaper than the ACA. They usually have better benefits than the ACA. But in order for these companies to control their costs, they have to make sure that they aren't having an adverse population selection by having people with pre-existing conditions who are high risk for health insurance companies. They need to avoid them coming on those plans and making a big claim in the first 12 months. They got to protect their premium, protect their policyholders, protect their rates. So the look-back period, I'm not concerned with it. My clients shouldn't be concerned with it because we properly vet them and make sure they don't have anything going on. If you are concerned about it, if it is heightening your anxiety and you're like, I just don't even, is this health insurance even good in the first 12 months? If that's your mindset going into it, just go to the ACA. But if you're willing to look at health insurance a little bit differently, to understand your pre-existing aren't going to be covered in the first 12 months, you can typically find a really good alternative to the ACA if you're comfortable with it. Does that answer your question?
Definitely does. Because, the look-back period, it's actually, they're doing it for you. They're doing it so you don't have rate increases because people are taking advantage of the system, right?
It is protecting the population, but it's also preventing, people demonize and vilify health insurance, and rightfully so. It is an earned reputation. They demonize and vilify, health insurance agents too, which many of my colleagues, it's an earned reputation as well. There are a lot of really good health insurance agents out there. That's not what I'm alluding to. There's some not so great ones. They want to demonize it, but those same people, there are millions of people out there who exploit the system too for their own benefit. And what I'm talking about is they've got a pre-existing condition. They don't have any health insurance. They wait until an open enrollment period on the ACA, hop up on one of those because it has to cover pre-existing, get something done in the first month or two, and then cancel the plan, and then rinse, repeat. And so these people aren't paying into the system, but they're benefiting from the system. They're exploiting the ACA. That's contributing to the rate increases. That's contributing to the plans deteriorating in quality. And so what you're kind of alluding to, it's not necessarily to the person's benefit that they're looking back, doing a look back period on their claim. It's kind of annoying if you get a pre-existing, investigation. It's kind of a pain in the butt. Like, okay, it's not a pre-existing condition. Go ahead and investigate it. Okay, after their investigation, they paid the claim. It usually only takes a couple weeks. But what they're trying to do is protect the product and protect the whole group of people. So in a very roundabout way, yes, it is to protect that product, that segment of the population who has chosen to be on that plan. Because if they don't do these lookbacks and they just pay out these claims in the first 12 months without doing any sort of investigation or any sort of look back, people are going to exploit it. And then when people exploit it and their claims go way up, that health insurance company has no choice but to then raise their rates. And now we're back in this rinse and repeat cycle of, well, that plan's no longer any better than the ACA, might as well just go to the ACA, when we were originally trying to get out of the ACA. So I think the look back period is fabulous. And if you're not worried about the first 12 months, you got to get off the ACA.
Yeah. I well put, honestly. Makes sense to me. And I think the other thing that pops in people's minds when it comes to pre-existing is medication, right? This medication world that we live in, brand names, people dancing on the TV.
Our life looks so good.
Yeah.
Those singing and dancing commercials, they're like always around a fountain. The sun is so bright. Everybody's smiling. Their skin looks great. And, it's all because of Skyrizi or whatever it is, whatever the new injectable biologique is.
Yeah. And so people, are definitely starting to come around to GoodRx, Cost Plus Drugs. I think Trump has Trump RX now, which I heard
I think he just white labeled GoodRx. I think that's all he did.
I've seen some pricing on those, and it's not the cheapest.
Oh.
But, people are wondering, okay, do I need my health insurance to cover my medication? Because I think this is a very common thing people think about when it comes to health insurance. Well, it's got to cover my medications. And, these ACA alternatives that you're talking about, they don't have the same medication coverage or any medication coverage that's available on the ACA. And so, what does that decision tree look like when it comes to, hey, I have my list of medications. I don't plan to have anything big happen in the next 12 months. I am healthy otherwise. What is that decision tree for? Do I need the ACA to cover these? Or, hey, I can actually look at an alternative.
All you really need to know is if you're on a brand name, which means it doesn't have a generic alternative that you could also take. If you have a brand name, you need to be on the ACA. If you're buying your own health insurance, you have a brand name specialty med, you have to be on the ACA. And I know what a lot of people are probably thinking, well, I have the discount card, I got the copay card, so I want the non-ACA savings and the better plan, and I'll just use the copay card. You can only get those copay cards and discount programs if you have commercial health insurance, which is Affordable Care Act health insurance. If you are not concerned about the 12-month wait on pre-existing, and you have generic meds, and you have maintenance meds, you shouldn't care that your health insurance doesn't cover it. Your health insurance is going to make it more expensive to fill generic prescriptions. You should be using GoodRx. Amazon has a program. WellRx, Cost Plus Drugs. Yeah, there's a Trump RX. Apparently it stinks. However you can find your prescriptions cheaper, running it through your health insurance is almost always going to make it more expensive. Unless you have really good like pipe fitter union health insurance, then you probably shouldn't even be watching this. Anyway, this is mostly for people who have to buy their own health insurance. But if you are super concerned about prescription coverage, but all you're taking is generics, then you've been sort of fooled by the system. You don't need prescription coverage on your health insurance unless you have a name brand, because we can get it for you cheaper utilizing any of the programs that we've been discussing. And that's how you should fill it anyway. So if your health insurance doesn't cover medications and all you're on is generics, it's just not an issue. Now, if you are sitting there thinking, well, what if I ever go on Skyrizi? What if I need to be singing and dancing around the fountain and I need this name brand? That's okay. You can always hop onto the ACA. They will welcome you with open arms. It's a guaranteed issue plan. So if you get put on one of those, yeah, we might be outside the open enrollment period. Let's say in August, they say you got to be on Skyrizi. Well, your private non-ACA plan, it's not going to cover that Skyrizi. So maybe you get a few samples, maybe you trail along for a few months, and then bam, at the open enrollment period, we'll put you on an ACA and it'll cover the Skyrizi. But outside of that, there's no reason to think that your health insurance needs to cover prescriptions. It's a huge trap.
Huge trap. And it's always funny when I get on a call with someone and they list off their medications, and I hop on whatever it is, Cost Plus Drugs, and show them what the prices are. I mean, they're like, oh, okay.
It's cheaper than what they're paying now, like what they're currently on when they're talking to you.
What's the catch?
Right, what's the catch? You don't even need health insurance to use Cost Plus Drugs or GoodRx. If you are uninsured and you have a regular medication, you should be using GoodRx or Cost Plus Drugs. Absolutely. You don't need to use a broker. You don't need to use a health insurance agent. You don't need to have health insurance.
Yeah. So one thing I want to talk about is this idea of potentially developing a condition while you're on a health insurance plan. And there are a few terms that get thrown around: guaranteed renewable, covers pre-existing conditions from day one. And I think we have a lot of people who sometimes veer towards a short-term medical, which is an ACA alternative, but it is different from a guaranteed renewable private plan. And so I just want to talk about, hey, how well am I covered if I do get something new on, let's call it those three options, right? Because it varies.
It can. So you're worried about if I get sick on the plan, what's going to happen to me?
Yeah.
All right. So on the ACA, nothing. They kind of want you to be sick on the ACA, if I'm being perfectly honest. They make more money. They keep you in the system. They get you with your copays. You want to hit your deductible. You're in their system. So, and that's fine. That works for a lot of people. The ACA's got 20 million people on it, something like that. And it's working for probably at least half of them. The other half, So if you get sick on that, it doesn't matter. It covers pre-existing anyway. So if you develop a new condition, they'll find a new specialist for you to see and a new singing and dancing drug to put you on. And that's the ACA, that's fine. But when we're talking about ACA alternatives, if we go to a short-term medical. So short-term medical could be renewed up to 3 years. This does not cover pre-existing conditions in the first 12 months. And you can get one of the big name brands. You can get an Anthem short-term medical. You can get a United Healthcare short-term medical. And they kind of feel like a major medical, even in all the fine print. It's saying this is not an ACA alternative. This doesn't cover the 10 essential benefits, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I don't have something necessarily against short-term medical. We just don't really place a lot of them because they only last for the short term. And a lot of our clients need something for long term. A lot of them are, entrepreneurs, small business owners, that type. And so the issue with the short-term medical is it won't cover pre-existing in the first 12 months. And you say, well, I can renew it up to 3 years, and that's absolutely true. So if you take out the short-term medical and you don't have a health condition, and then you develop one while you're on it, it'll be covered, okay? Because it's not a pre-existing, it's something new. After you took the health insurance out, it'll be covered. And it'll be covered up to that full 3 years if when you bought it, you decided to buy a 3-year term. It'll be covered up to the term length that you decided. But some people are flipping like 6-month short-term medicals. They're doing 6 months at a time. 6 months here, then I'll just renew it, then I'll renew it, then I'll renew it. And that's okay too if you stay healthy forever. And some people will. I plan to. So I'm not really averse to this. But here's the nightmare scenario on the short-term medical. If you're doing 6-month flips, if you've got a 6-month term and you get hit by a bus in month 5 and you're in the ICU and then you need a follow-up surgery in month 7, 8, 9, 10, maybe you're doing physical therapy, I don't know. But when you go to renew that short-term medical after that initial 6-month term, it's now a brand new plan. So months 7 to 12, this is a new short-term medical. Pre-existing conditions are not going to be covered on this. So if your prognosis from one term to another bleeds into the other term, all those claims will be declined because those are now a pre-existing condition. So that's the nightmare scenario you find yourself in. Imagine a cancer diagnosis or something like that. If you're on a 6-month short-term medical and you go to renew it, it's not going to cover any of that stuff. And you might be saying, okay, well, then I can just get on the ACA at the next open enrollment period, which you absolutely can, and it will cover that pre-existing. But weren't we trying to avoid the ACA in the first place because it wasn't very good? So why is that the backup plan if I get sick? That doesn't really sound like a good solution. So let's talk instead about these health insurance plans that are something called guaranteed renewable. That is a very familiar term in life insurance. You know, if you take out a life insurance plan, a 30-year term, it's guaranteed renewable for those 30 years, even if you get super sick. You lock in the rate, you lock in the length of the term and the benefit, that's great. But there are also guaranteed renewable health insurance plans that once you take it out, as long as they issue you the plan, you can keep it in perpetuity. You can cancel it whenever you want, but you can also keep it as long as you want. These plans, if you get sick on those plans, they can never kick you off. They can't single you out for a rate increase. They can't force you to go back through medical underwriting. So if you get a really bad diagnosis, even day 2 of one of these plans, and it's not due to a pre-existing, you can then keep that throughout the completion of your diagnosis and your treatment, and you can keep it in perpetuity after that. Because if they raise your rates, they got to raise everybody else in the risk pool's rates. And so everybody has to have the same rate increase. So if they raise your rates, they got to raise my rates because I'm on one of those plans. So the guaranteed renewable is really great because if you go into it healthy, it doesn't matter how sick you get. You can keep it as long as you want. Does that make sense?
Does to me. Love it.
Yeah.
So pre-existing conditions. That's all the things that I have to talk about. I'm sure there are more questions. Have you heard any common questions, people getting confused about, when they're describing what they got going on health-wise, or are people, once you get into it, it's pretty straightforward?
My rule of thumb is if you have to ask me, would this count as a pre-existing? It would. And so don't try to sneak anything past. Now, that's not to say you can't take out one of these plans that has a waiting period if you do have a pre-existing condition. I'm comfortable with that as long as you're comfortable that no claims will be paid out in that first 12 months for whatever condition that is. Then we're on the same page, then we're good. A lot of people, they might have a mental health, they got anxiety or they got depression or whatever. Well, a lot of health insurance plans aren't covering mental health therapy anyway. They say they cover it, but none of the good therapists accept the insurance. And so you're not being covered for it anyway. And you're probably on a generic anxiety or depression drug, which you don't need insurance to cover anyway. So if your health insurance doesn't cover that for the first 12 months, your anxiety and your mental health and your $4 a month prescription, what's really the big deal? Is it a pre-existing? Yeah. But you're not going to have a $30,000 claim that's denied in the first 12 months over it. You'll never have a $30,000 claim because of it.
Right.
So not really an issue. Now, chronic type 2 diabetes, that's another issue altogether.
Sure. I think the last question that people have is, okay, I had a condition, I had cancer back in 2015, right? And I've gone through remission, I've been cleared, it's cleared up in 2020, whatever it was. How does that implicate their health insurance?
Okay, so if you remember me talking about the questionnaire for these ACA alternatives that have pre-existing condition clauses, a lot of them will have a question about cancer specifically. They'll say, hey, within the last 5 years, were you diagnosed or treated for cancer, any internal cancer, blah, 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 blah. They'll have a bunch of subsets of it. As long as you can truthfully answer no to that, well, then they can't come back with you and say, dude, you got cancer in 2026, but you had cancer in 2015. It's outside the purview of the policy, even when you read in the fine print. The only time they could come back at you is if, let's say the question said, hey, within the last 5 years, you've been diagnosed or treated for cancer, and 4 years and 11 months ago, you got your last round of chemo, and you're like, well, I could just say no. It's close enough, and you click no. They might issue you the policy. They might give it to you because they trust you. And then in the first 12 months, you're going along and, nothing's happening. And then in the 10th or 11th month, it comes back. Cancer comes back. Well, they're going to do a pre-existing condition check. They're going to do a look back, and they're going to see, dude lied on it. Even though it was further back than, say, their 24-month look back, you lied on the application. That's called a misrepresentation. So if you choose to lie on one of those applications by answering no when you should ask yes or answer yes on one of those questions, they can come back on you with that too. But as long as you can truthfully say, no, it's been longer than 5 years since I had my heart attack, since I had the stroke, since I had the internal cancer, it was 8 years
surgery,
ago, whatever it is. As long as you're answering truthfully on all that, they can't pop you legally. They cannot deny the claim if you're following the rules and if you're abiding by all that. See, health insurance gets this bad rap, and it is rightfully earned. Absolutely, it's rightfully earned. If the health insurance company can find a way to not pay a claim, they're probably going to find that way. But they also have to follow their own contracts. So if you understand, you read the contract, and you abide by it, it's legally binding. You can file an appeal. You can run it up the chain with the Department of Insurance, the commissioner of the Department of Insurance. They'll overturn that thing if you are in the right. Where most people get it wrong with health insurance, where most of these reviews are just scathing about this company did that, or I had such a bad experience with this. I'm not trying to say that you're wrong, but in most of those cases, it's user error. It truly is user error. And it was just not your fault, but it was a misunderstanding, or you potentially misrepresented yourself when you took out the plan. And so it always helps to have expert advice, somebody guiding you, walking you through it. So we highly encourage that. But that's kind of my piece about pre-existing.
I like it. That's all we got. This has been another episode of Talking Shit, straight health insurance talk, and we'll be back.
Thanks, guys.